Welcome everybody today to our ICT Educator webinar series. I'm Steve Wright. I'm the statewide director of the ICT sector team, which is part of the Workforce and Economic Development Department of the California Community College System. And these webinars are brought to you by our entire sector team, and they're produced by Nicole Sherman. Our guest speakers all volunteer their time for the sake of our the student success of our system. I'd like to quickly remind you of an excellent ICT Winter Conference that's planned for January 7th and 8th virtually. It's put on by Western Area Something Training Center. Karen Stanton and Richard Grodiga have been doing this for years. Many of you go. It's a great two days of excellent training for faculty and updates on technology and educational practices. So don't miss it. Also on our website now, we have, I believe, over 40 recorded webinars. Here's some of the incredible people that we've had speak at different times. Carefully selected experts with successful how-to techniques for you to use. Each webinar is also video recorded, edited, chapterized, transcripted, along with the PowerPoint presentations and relevant links for later viewing. And 40% of our viewership is after this initial webinar right here. And with over 4,000 views to date, and many of our faculty tell us that they use this for a classroom, for labor market research, for grant writing, and lots of other things. So we're real excited about continuing this. And in the next few weeks, we're going to have how to build a digital media dual enrollment. It's always interesting when partnerships with high schools are critical. And then we have an expert in the new DevNet Associate program with Cisco Academy will be speaking to us on November 20th. So we're looking forward to those. Today is going to be interesting. What the heck is competency-based learning? I mean, I think I know, but how does it look if you implement it in the California Community College system? So I'm going to be taking notes on this one. I'm going to introduce you to Mara Lakawan. She's going to be talking to us now from her program management position with Jobs for the Future, JFF. And Mara, can you take it from here? And you have an incredible background of utilizing things like this to help all kinds of students. And I want to hear how it works.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me on your webinar today. I'm really excited to be here and to share with you what we have been learning about competency-based education. So just so you all know, I'm part of a team at JFF that's been working on competency-based education. And we have been working with the Chancellor's Office, the 5C, and the Success Center on developing a blueprint to support community colleges interested in CBE, direct assessment CBE in particular. And so I'm going to be sharing a little bit about that with you all today and what we learned through that process. And want to hear more what you all are thinking about this and how you think this approach may or may not be useful for ICT programs in California. So thank you, Steve, for that introduction. I wanted to, in addition to learning where everyone is from, which is great to have such a diversity of folks on the line, have this kind of fun icebreaker for you all. Just want to get a sense of where folks are coming from in terms of your existing knowledge on CBE. So on a scale from 1 to 10, and just put the number in the chat, would you say you are a 1, you know nothing, and you're here to learn? Or are you a 10 and we could switch roles and you could give this presentation today? So let's just hear where folks think they're at. Oh, great, a bit of a spread. Okay, some 7s and some 8s. Lots of 1s. Okay, great, this is really helpful. So I hope there'll be something in this presentation for everyone today. We're definitely gonna, given all the kind of 1s and 2s and 3s, spend some time talking about what is CBE, what do we mean by that? And we'll, here, let me pull up my agenda actually so you can see, spend some time talking about what it is, why we're talking about CBE now, and in California, and then go into a little bit of that blueprint that I mentioned and the opportunities that that I see from where I sit, and I want to hear from you all from where you sit in terms of developing CBE programs within your ICT programs. So, and a little bit of looking ahead at the end. So, why CBE and why now? Well, we based on the research we have to date, CBE is a promising approach to higher education that really meets students where we're at, which we hear is really core to the vision for success. It can also help accelerate students towards completion or transfer, which is, again, something that is really echoed, in the vision for success goals. It's designed to really be aligned to workforce demands and really truly provide economic opportunities for students and adults across the state. So it could be a great way for regions to think about economic recovery right now. There's a huge equity imperative right now embedded within the vision for success, but also through the call to action from the Chancellor's office. And we see a lot of institutions, which I'll talk about later in this presentation, who have adopted CBE exactly for the reason that it is a promising way to support more underrepresented groups in degree completion and transfer. So that's a large rationale for why institutions embark on offering competency-based ed programs. They are also nimble and flexible programs, which we, especially right now in the pandemic, are seeing a large increase in institutions wanting to find ways to meet students where they're at, provide that flexibility. And this is one way that institutions can consider doing that. So what is competency-based education? So this is a definition that is a little bit of a concise definition based upon CBEN, which is a national network, the Competency-Based Education Network's definition of CBE. And it is really, as it says here, designed to measure students' progress towards a credential in terms of learning attained rather than time completed. So the learning is variable, the time is variable and the learning is constant, which means that you might still have similar sounding objectives for students in terms of degree completion, but the time that it takes for them to get there will vary depending on the students, what's going on in the students' lives, and if they're accelerating or on a slower path to completion. That's a really concise definition here. The curriculum would be built around the competencies that are tied to a program, not to a course. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but there's not, you don't have credits for courses, you don't have courses and you don't have credit hours, but you have programs that are aligned to competencies. Students are often able to access the learning resources, including assistance from any instructional staff, support staff, directly aligned with those competencies. And there are some interesting ways that it shifts the faculty role in supporting learners through this model. And we'll talk about that and what we're seeing in the research and what institutions are reporting in terms of the ways in which faculty and staff roles shift in order to accommodate this model. So also, I will say we're going to have some time for interaction throughout this presentation and also a Q&A at the end. So please, if you have questions that they arise, put them in the chat and we will get to them. So I wanted to just take a minute to kind of dig a little deeper into the definition. So right now, our systems are built on the credit hour model, which is based on seat time. So students sit in a course for a semester, designated amount of time, and the credit hour is really used as a basis for awarding financial aid, determining faculty workload, and degree completion requirements. In competency-based education, it's focused on the mastery of learning, demonstrated through activities that are aligned to the programmatic outcomes. So hours may vary. It does say here fully online modules. That's the way in which the Chancellor's Office is pursuing their CBE collaborative. Not all CBE programs across the country are fully online, but that is what they're kind of, that's the route that they're advocating institutions take right now, given our current situation. It also, competency-based ed also has often a more flexible academic calendar, and that has a lot of implications for, various institutional operations. And we'll get into that a little bit. Yeah, great. Marnie, question here. If it's not based on credit hour, how are students demonstrating mastery? there are still assessments. So there's different types of formative assessments students do to demonstrate their mastery of those competencies, and they must complete all of the competencies to earn their degree. And we'll talk a little bit more about that structure, but that's a really good question. So a little bit more, I know we had a lot of people who said 1 and 2, so I'm just taking my time to go through these slides a little bit, and I hope it's helpful. We can always circle back to these slides if I'm moving too quickly. So what CBE is and CBE is not. Again, it's a little bit of a reformatting of what was on the other slide, but just to state again, CBE, the time is variable, it's self-paced. It's not the course set pace like in our typical credit hour calendars. The learning is fixed, so it does just require that demonstration of mastery. And as opposed to in kind of our traditional, or many of our traditional courses, students can pass with an A, B, C, D. When students need to demonstrate mastery, there's a pretty high level of proficiency required in order to qualify for demonstration of mastery, and faculty set that bar. So that's something you would determine as a faculty at your institution what that bar is, but it tends to be pretty high. So the CBE is determined by rigorous summative, authentic assessment. Student evaluation, as opposed to student evaluations, vary based on an accumulation of activities, attendance, exams and projects. Students are supported very intensely by faculty and support staff throughout their learning journey in CBE. It is not the equivalent to an independent study where students are kind of left more on their own to self-pace. There's an intense amount of support in CBE programs, and the completion of programs is based on mastery of the scaffolded competencies, as opposed to passing grades, credit hours required for degree. So I'm going to carry on. There's a lot of fantastic resources out there. There's one, AIR does an annual State of the Field on CBE, and this is some images from their infographic from 2019. They surveyed, there was over 600 institutions that responded to this survey. And so it's a great report that is linked to at the end of this PowerPoint that gives you a sense of like where institutions are across the country in terms of offering CBE. There were, in 2019, 64 institutions in the country that reported operating 588 CBE programs. And so that's a huge increase from 2018. And 76% of institutions indicate that they are going to continue expanding. So this is like a really rapidly accelerating area for higher ed, and just points to the value of taking part in webinars like this to learn more and understand what's happening and how to stay competitive in this field. As I said, there's some indications here on what types of programs institutions are offering, with computer and information sciences being one of the most popular. So a lot of folks find an easier or more seamless transition from, traditional programs into offering CBE for computer and IT programs. You'll see as well, let me see, I think on this slide, yeah, there's just lots of great information here. I won't dwell on it too long, but as you can see here on the right side, why are institutions offering it? 57% said that there were opportunities to serve non-traditional students were the reasons, the motivations for providing CBE programs. And then there are a lot of barriers to CBE, some of which are outlined in this report, and we'll talk a little bit about more later. There's startup costs, there's, competing priorities, as you all know about, but those barriers are ultimately deemed to be, institutions deemed to kind of take on those barriers in order to implement it for the perceived benefits. So So two things that we often hear about CBE, which make a lot of sense, is that non-credit is already doing CBE, and what's the difference between credit for prior learning and competency-based education? These terms get used a lot because they're both strategies to accelerate degree completion and transfer for students. So I'm just going to take a minute to share this information that the Chancellor's Office provided on non-credit versus direct assessment CBE and their very first CBE webinar that they offered, I think, back in June. And so this, I think, is just a nice kind of simple way to outline, you know, that non-credit has a lot of overlap with CBE, but there are some important differences. Things like how the learning is evaluated within non-credit are still tied to courses, where in CBE it's tied to that program level. You don't really have courses the way that you do on the credit hour model. If your institution is considering a direct assessment CBE program, you will need to, part of the process is to apply for approval from your regional accreditor, and the U.S. Department of Ed. So it's a part of the substantive change approval process that you'll need to go through. But students are eligible for financial aid through direct assessment programs, which is great. And the Chancellor's Office is still working out the funding model for apportionment. So TBD on that. And then what is credit for prior learning versus CBE? So credit for prior learning, broken down here into, you know, program integration. So credit for prior learning is a pre-program certification to satisfy program requirements. So you can come in with certain credits that are applicable towards your degree or credential. In direct assessment CBE, all of the certification of learning happens within the program. So it's not that you're taking a test prior to enrolling in the program, but you could accelerate more quickly through the program if you have certain skills or knowledges when coming in. In terms of achieving mastery, again, the pre-program experiences in CPL happen outside of the program influence. It happens before you enter the program. In CBE, it's all facilitated by the faculty and the staff that are supporting the program. And then evaluations, credit for prior learning is often some kind of credit by exam or portfolio, some type of assessment of that learning. And in CBE, it's the examination of those competencies. And here, like I said, you know, many institutions look for something like 80% of mastery of a competency to count as a mastery. So that's a little bit of the differentiation there. Again, we can spend some more time talking about this at the end if folks have questions. Did want to get like a little bit of a pulse check on how folks are, you know, hearing all of this, you know, to what, and so I have this question for us in the chat to consider, you know, what, based on, you know, this brief presentation, what's kind of standing out around CBE that aligns with the way in which you're currently doing your IT programs on campuses, and how do you see that it might be different? Give folks a minute to think about this. Great, some great comments coming in. Eileen, I just want to, you have a great comment here around students learn at their own pace and not dependent on the instructor. I just want to clarify, it's not the same as, I don't know if this is what you were getting at, but it is different than independent study when students kind of progress at their own pace. The student's learning journey is very much guided by the instructor, by the faculty. It just looks a little bit different because you don't have a class that all shows up at the same time that you're teaching to. It's much more of a personalized, kind of like a coaching experience, but very much guided by an instructor. Yeah, Allison, great question. There's, yes, faculty members interacting with, you know, up to 40 students on 40 different tasks. Yes, that's a good question. They are, I mean, it depends on how you set up your program design, but hypothetically, yes, you might have a lot of students at different paces, moving along at different paces, which is why the faculty role often looks a little bit different in CBE, where you might have, depending on how often students are accessing the curriculum, you might have fewer students than you currently have that you're supporting more intensely, or you might have a larger number of students that are checking in a little bit, you know, more on a more spread out pace. Yeah, folks are raising some really good questions here. I'm gonna, I don't know if my upcoming section is gonna answer all of them, so I think we're gonna need to come back to some of this. Yes, I'm just seeing this last question here. For CBE programs, is there a time limit set for students to complete courses? Yeah, that's also something that the institution can set up, whether or not, what type of time limit you're gonna put on students to complete competencies and how many times they could repeat a competency. Those are all things that institutions take different approaches on. Most institutions do set a limit though, because if you just let students go, it's very easy to not complete. Yeah, great question around grades and transcripts. That is something we talked a lot about with the 5C. And yes, most institutions, what they do is they have like a dual transcript where you'd have a CBE transcript and a traditional transcript where the competencies are mapped to credit hour, your kind of credit hour courses. And that's, yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I'm seeing a theme here, and it seems to be that there's a question of how customizable is the CBE. Is this intended to be something that's highly customized by student or college, or is it kind of a standardized approach to the levels or scaffolding, I think you called it, of the key skills?
There's a great deal of flexibility in how institutions actually go about offering this. And I think there was a question here around hybrid models. That's also something that a lot of institutions are, I think it's becoming more popular, where students might take some traditional courses and some CBE, and pass some CBE competencies to fulfill a degree requirement. So there's a lot of what I'm presenting today is kind of overview and kind of generalities. If you look at that State of the Field report, you'll see institutions are trying really different methods. And part of that is, just based on your local needs, what's happening in the region, what already is the assets at your institution that you want to integrate in some way. Yeah, great question, Gina, around how it matches up with industry certifications. That's something I'm interested too as well in hearing from this group. And I think I wonder if that's why computer and information systems is one of the most popular CBE types of programs institutions offer, because there's already that kind of alignment there. So I'm going to move on a little bit just for the interest of time, but we will have some more time for questions, and I'll try and scroll back through this list as we go. I wanted to share a little bit just what some resources are available for you all as you're thinking about CBE, and if it's a good fit for your institution and your program. So this is around the CBE blueprint for colleges, and this was a document that JFF developed in collaboration with the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office staff, the 5C, and the Foundation for California Community Colleges Policy Center staff. We also worked with some subject matter experts, primarily Lori Dodge, who's a VC at Brandman University, which is one of the few institutions in the whole country that actually offers direct assessment CBE, which I should have clarified earlier. There is a big difference between direct assessment and other forms of CBE. There's actually a few different models. Direct assessment is the one that I'm primarily talking about today in all of these slides, because it's the one that the Chancellor's Office is using for their CBE collaborative. So some of the slides are tailored towards that, because that's the opportunity that exists right now for colleges to join. And we also worked with Eddie Koma, who's one of the associate professor at UC Riverside, and he helped really ensure that the blueprint and the policy regulations that came out of this group really had a strong equity focus and lens. So that's how this blueprint was kind of developed. And then what is the blueprint? It's 7 phases that we've broken out that leaders of community colleges can consider when, initiating discussions around CBE, and if it's a good fit for your institutions, all the way through launch and continuous program improvement through action research. So there's these 7 phases here, and the blueprint kind of goes through each phase and outlines some action steps that are related to each and the stakeholders that you might want to involve in each level of planning and decision making. So the first phase is really those initial 6 months where you're building your local infrastructure for innovation. Then there's an opportunity to select the program, and I'll share a little bit around what some of the details of that looks like. Then designing the program, that's where a lot of the decisions come in around faculty model, academic calendar, what are the actual competencies, the curriculum, the assessments, what does that all look like? You'll need to obtain your regional accreditation and federal program approval, usually during the design phase of the program and into the operational model, which is where you're going to need to set up your learning management system or integrate it. Think about your financial aid system, and then of course launching the program, marketing, onboarding, any of the PD that might be associated with that, and then your ongoing data collection and continuous program improvement. So the blueprint's still pretty high level, but it does give you some great action steps associated with each of these phases in order to help create that work plan that you're going to need for your institution to build a program. I just pulled out a few examples in this presentation today, so you can kind of get a sense for those of you who might be interested in joining the CBE collaborative that the Chancellor's Office has initiated, or if you're just interested in learning more. In the first phase, it's really about, getting those stakeholders together in your region, at your institution. You're going to want to establish some kind of committee charter. You're going to want to start to gather and review your demographics and your impact data to see, and this is all building to a determination on which program you're going to offer through the CBE model. So we have some guiding questions here to consider as this group forms. How does it fit in with your mission of your institution? What would CBE look like at your institution? Like I said, there's different types of models. Are there other regulatory requirements? The Chancellor's Office next week, I think the Board of Governors is going for their second read on the policy regulations for CBE, but that's, system level. I anticipate there's going to be some district level policies or regulations you might want to consider, and that might need to be modified in order to accommodate CBE. There's different business models out there, and there's actually great resources. Again, CBEN, who I mentioned earlier, has a really great resource on the different business models that you might consider. And then again, what data are you going to use to measure student success? The way in which students progress through a CBE program looks different than your traditional programs. And so, what do you actually want to be looking at, and how are you going to set up a system to do that? So these are some things that are, you might want to consider within the first phase. Within the second phase, like I said, this is when you get to select a program. And this is, you're going to want to potentially survey students in the program area, see if you're getting responses that indicate they would be interested in this type of program approach. You're going to want to be connecting with partners to understand and align to your labor market needs. So maybe working with your Center of Excellence, local workforce boards. You're going to want to understand, what's the employment outlook for different IT or IT-related professions, so you can really match your program to those. Ensuring that your graduates are going to be earning a living wage for your region. What kind of partners and capacity do you have to mobilize around a new CBE program? So, who, faculty, deans, business leaders, and what kind of gap or problem might this program offer for your region? Oftentimes institutions convene an industry-led advisory board to support this, and or utilize, existing ones. I know, for a lot of the California colleges, you already have industry advisory boards for your program. So, connecting them to this effort, and then really selecting what the credit-bearing certificate or degree will be. So it's all related to selecting the program. And then you get to design the program, and there's a lot of steps here. I just pulled out a few, but this is going to be where you really want to start to onboard all of the faculty, support staff to this program, make your plan for PD. You're going to be developing your curricula, your assessments, the learning resources, deciding what that faculty staff model is going to look like, linking up with your work-based learning options, doing your credit walk, your crosswalk competencies credit hours. That's important because for right now, that's still the way that you're going to need to access federal financial aid. So U.S. Department of Ed is coming out with new regulations related to direct assessment CBE, but essentially you're going to need on the back end that credit crosswalk. You're also going to need that for the dual transcripts and other things. So, and it might be the way apportionment is ultimately set up too, we'll see. But that's going to need to happen. And of course, all your wraparound services. So again, I know a lot here, but and I'm kind of breezing through this really quickly, but you can see more in the blueprint itself. I just wanted to give you a sense of kind of how it's organized and the types of things, if you're an individual who's thinking about it for your institution, the kinds of things that you might want to start thinking about based on the research and the conversations that we've had with the team. I pulled in a few slides here that are just really about the way in which faculty often go about designing the program. Lori Dodge, who was one of the subject matter experts involved in this, co-authored a book called A Leader's Guide to Competency-Based Ed. And for those of you who are leaders at your institution thinking about this, I do really recommend it. She lays out this method, backwards design, as a way for faculty, and there's lots of steps there, how faculty can think about this, which is around designing your assessments and then the support materials for students to achieve their competencies. And again, I know I'm going quickly through this, and this is probably going to be really tiny on your screen, but one thing I mentioned in this phase is really that determining the faculty and staff role. Oftentimes, institutions will start off offering a direct assessment CBE program in a really similar model to what you all have now in your traditional models. But as your programs scale and as they grow, sometimes those roles evolve, because exactly as one person in the chat was saying, like, what if you've got 40 students or 100 students who are all at like different places as they're progressing? So the research indicates that faculty and staff roles tend to shift as institutions start to scale programs. And this is just a snapshot of the roles that faculty, non-faculty, or both play at the institutions that participated in that state of the field. So you'll see, faculty are still primarily, providing instruction and evaluating the assessments, but there's, when it comes to advising students, mentoring students, there's other staff that might be involved in those activities too, the support staff. Again, just things to consider, different faculty models out there. The research tends to show that faculty really, once programs get off the ground and rolling, faculty often like it because you can spend more time directly with students and less time with some of the administrative pieces that folks currently have on their plate. You all will have to tell me how you think about it. And this is a little bit what we learned through that process and what we are learning around CBE based on the research and things that we're hearing from the field. Really, there's a lot that's required to implement a program. There's a big startup cost associated with it, even if we're just talking, financial, but also just, the capacity and time of people, because it requires, like I said, technology integration, financial aid, academic calendar, lots of different things coming into play. Collaboration is really key. With all the various partners at your institution and in your region. There are equity considerations for the different models that you may pursue. Different types of academic calendars have implications on, financial aid disbursement. Different ways in which you're going to set up your student supports are going to also have, you're going to also want to consider, the student populations that you want to reach and what's going to work best for them. Programs really need to have tight labor market alignment, which is where I think the ICT programs have great potential, because you all tend to have strong partnerships anyway. at least based on my conversations with Steve and what I've seen. And local alignment and adaptation is key, which is what you're saying, Steve. Yeah, like there's a lot of scope to really customize this for your institution. So again, I'm going to pause for a moment. We are getting near the time when I want to turn it over to some more questions. But just like upon reflection, great, yeah, Sean, I see your question coming in. You know, I'm going to pause for a minute for folks to share more questions, you know, where you think there might be momentum for this or not, and or what resources do you think could be helpful as you think about this and as you try to assess whether or not CBE is right for your institution? What are the other types of things you'd want to know or want to have access to? So I'm going to give folks a minute to put in the chat, and I will also review the questions in the chat to try and get to some of them now as we go through. There are a lot of really good questions here. Some of these questions I'm seeing are, there's no one answer to it because it is something that you can decide. So Trevor, I see a question from you from a little bit earlier around a fixed duration for the class. Is there a fixed duration for the classes? And the answer is like, it depends. So, some institutions offer CBE on a subscription model. So learners might pay for or sign up for 6 months they might pay a fee, they might pay tuition, they might sign up for a 6 months duration. They can complete a package of competencies in those 6 months and progress, however quickly they want. And at the end of the 6 months, they might, extend their subscription and do the next set of competencies. The competencies are often bundled. So students might need to complete a certain bundle before moving on to the next bundle. But you can also set up a system where there's no end to when students can, no end date. It's just they can't progress until they finish that bundle to move on to the next one. So there's different ways that you can set it up, and there's various implications for how you might want to do it. A lot of the big institutions in this country, like Western Governors, big CBE provider, use Capella uses subscription models, but they are, those are private institutions.
I can't help asking though. I mean, the economies of scale on this baffle me. I can see where it's very effective on an individual kind of basis, but is this taught in a classroom environment and then people are followed up on individually, or are there ways to get scale on this so that it's because it sounds like a pretty labor intensive kind of thing?
Yeah, there are, based on what we see, there's significant startup costs to getting it done, but actually the economies of scale work out after about 5 years of implementation. So there's not a lot of that lecture-based teaching happening. The students are progressing through learning materials that are packaged in such a way, like videos, resources that they go in and access, like you'd go into Coursera and access it. And then they have their faculty to kind of touch base with them and check in on their learning. So the way we see it in a lot of different models. So I don't know if that answers your whole question, Steve, but it does take a while for it to balance out, but eventually we see over time, institutions can reduce their cost for program delivery through this model, but it takes a couple of years to get there.
It's almost like a whole mind change in how you go ahead and approach a cohort of students that they may not all finish at the same time. And yet they have certain prescribed skills that we're talking about in the scaffolding. And it's a whole lot more flexibility for the student. The question is, will the faculty be running in circles or not?
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely more work that happens on the operation side to get this going in order for it to be a smooth experience for learners. There's like so many good questions here. Yeah, so Trevor, another good question, like around the differentiation between direct assessment versus other CBE. There are other ways of offering CBE, some of which I talked about, like on the non-credit space. Non-credit in California, there are already CBE programs happening where students kind of progress at their own pace. They are, though, they're often aligned to like still on semesters or credit hours in terms of calculating students' progress or faculty apportionment, and that makes them more traditional CBE programs. Most of the institutions that were in that State of the Field report are offering CBE for credit in a similar capacity where it's still like within a semester, but students can kind of progress at their own pace. Direct assessment is really blows that out in the sense that there's really different academic calendar models associated with that, and you're not on a semester system or anything like that.
It seems like CBE lends itself, for at least some disciplines, to more digital content and delivery. So I guess what I'm saying is it looks like one of the core requirements would be to have a lot of instructional design or instructional designers in order to design the courses for this competency-based delivery model. And so is there something within CBE that talks about, we have technology infrastructure that's required, we have these other curriculum aspects that are desired, but it really seems like to really make this go, that you have to have a high level of instructional design competency, for the various platforms you're going to use. It seems like, if you said, it takes 5 years to recoup your, get some ROI on your initial investment, then it would also seem that, this is kind of like a intensive design environment for CBE.
Yeah, that's great. So really good question. What we often see is in that phase 3, design the program, faculty will bring in instructional designers to help with some of the pieces that I think you're talking about exactly. It's going to require a decision around, what learning management system you're using. I think, Canvas is an option, but some institutions have opted for different management systems because of the ways that they can interact with students and create assessments. So, you could work with an instructional designer to support that piece. I think that's probably best practice right now. We see that a lot happening. So I do want to just alert people to some resources that exist as you're thinking about this. As I said, computer and information systems is one of the top CBE programs being offered. And there are some resources and models out there that you all could look to think about and get ideas around, CBE programs at your institution. This first one, I'm sure many of you know about, the ACM competency model for IT. There's an associate's and BA programs outlined in their report, the curricular report. And it outlines, it uses, let me get to the next slide. It uses, in this example of cybersecurity, it starts to call out competencies that you could use as one of the resources to consider when you're designing a program. And I know for those of you following the model IT curriculum, it has some of those attributes already. And this is, this example is from the associate's core IT learning outcomes with the 3 tiers. So like the competency would be an ability to demonstrate core IT competency in client computing and user support. And there's different learning outcomes here. You could use this to start to build your competencies in a program. There's institutions that are doing some interesting work. Brandman, where Lori Dodge is vice chancellor that I mentioned earlier, they have a BS in information technology. So again, for folks who are looking at different models, this one's in California. They have, for their BS, they have 13 competencies in general ed, 18 competencies in IT, and then different emphasis areas. I just pulled out one example so you could all kind of see, but in the, they have these 4 subdomains, which are the bolded categories, and then under, information technology foundations, they've got these 5 competencies here I put the titles, but they have, if you go onto their catalog, they have the, I'll put in the chat here. They have descriptions of those competencies, so you can kind of see how they were starting to structure it. Sinclair is another example from Dayton, Ohio. They, just to call out, different ways in which the faculty there used content standards in order to start to build out their competencies. They're a great example because they also developed that stakeholder collaborative with employers. So there's some interesting, lessons to be learned there around the ways in which they engaged industry in order to design those competencies. I know I'm whizzing through this because we're almost at time, and I did want to let folks know, as I mentioned earlier, today is actually the last day. The deadline was extended to sign up for the Chancellor's Office interest form to join the CBE Collaborative. This is not committing you to anything. I think it's just saying, I'm interested, tell me more, and they will send you, the application to join that collaborative. There's a lot of things on the Vision Resource Center too related to this opportunity and CBE in general. If folks haven't already checked it out, I encourage you to join the CBE community there and stay up to date on those resources. You can also, Trevor, I see your comment. Yeah, great. There's also a big conference happening next week called the CBE Exchange, which is run by CBEN, the big national organization on CBE. And JFF, you can see me there. You can see some friends from JFF, and also the Chancellor's Office staff and 5C representatives are presenting on the 12th at 11 a.m., a special session on design with equity for CBE. And that session is free, as well as a lot of the other general sessions. So if folks want to check it out, they have a ton of stuff going on. And and I think there's a fee if you want to join some of the additional breakouts, but the Chancellor's Office and this design with equity session, I think, is part of the free registration. So check it out. And also, of course, if you're interested, you can always reach out to me, because I should have put my email here. You can also follow up with me or Steve, and we'll send some resources out after this webinar. And also, if you want to connect on additional questions, feel free to reach out.
This is, it's strange to me that it should seem so mind-boggling to understand a concept that really is probably, I think, simple. I mean, I think you said at the beginning, it's just not time sensitive. And it sounds like a proceed at your own pace kind of thing. It could be structured or custom, a lot of other things too. Why do you think the Chancellor's Office likes this? What problem are they trying to solve by encouraging us to do this?
Yeah, I mean, from what they've shared, they've done a series of 3 webinars right now on CBE, the Chancellor's Office, all of which are available on the Vision Resource Center for folks who want to check it out. And, what we've heard is that it's, I don't think the intention is for institutions to, shift all the way CBE, but that it's an option. And it could be an option for institutions in order to reach certain adult populations, to support, like I said, accelerated degree and degree completion and transfers. And it could be a way to achieve equity goals that the system has set. I think, part of the CBE collaborative is it's very much designed to be a learning group, peer learning. So I think that the Chancellor's Office is looking to test whether or not that hypothesis is correct with this opportunity. But it would align with what the national data is pointing to in terms of CBE as being an effective strategy for meeting equity goals. But it does require, as a lot of you are putting in the chat, real, careful consideration of things like financial aid and whatnot in order to make sure that that is happening and that you're not exacerbating inequities.
Well, I think it's fascinating. We only have a couple minutes left. You can either, if you want to try to handle any of these questions in here, that's up to you. But I think we've got a lot of wonderful information today. I'm certainly challenged by what you're saying here, and for those of you that are out there that are in IT or related disciplines here in the community college system, if it's in your plan to go ahead with something like this, please look to the ICT sector team to partner with you in any way that we can to help you move along the path and share your best practices, or convene another meeting like this where we explore what maybe several different colleges are doing. I'm not sure exactly what the Chancellor's Office is doing in that way, so I don't want to like step on their activities, but if it turns out that that's a need to be filled, we'd be happy to do that. Yeah, David Gatewood, are you live?
I am.
You want to give us your comments and feedback on how you see this happening? Because I know you got a lot of responsibilities where you are, so let her rip.
Yeah, I'm David Gatewood. I'm the Dean of Economic and Workforce Development up at Shasta College. Some of our people, Mara, I think, have been working with JFF and with you and with the State Chancellor. Kate Mahar among one. I didn't see Kate on this call, but Shasta College.
Oh, yeah.
We're grabbing. Is she on this call?
No, but I have worked with her. Yes.
You know Kate.
Or I don't know if she's here, but.
So yes, we're very, very interested. Have many of the same observations, Steve, that you do. I mean, it just seems intuitive that if someone knows something and we need to help them demonstrate that knowledge so that the state can recognize it in some form of a transcript, which is, we're working out those details. We need to do that. It'll move people quicker, faster, better to career opportunities, to upskill, to upscale, to move on, to move up. To move in, to move back home. I mean, all those things. So we're pretty excited about it. We will, often, as in these cases, the biggest problem is us. Students want it, individuals want it, and employers need it. And the challenge is, as Mara has outlined and you have outlined, it's how do we do it and do it with integrity, make sure that faculty are at the center of the assessment. That that we're making sure that we continue to be in compliance with faculty needs and the state's needs. So yes, thank you so much for this. And Mara, we're gonna stay in touch and keep working on this initiative until we get it right. So thank you.
Well, these questions are really great. I think we'll review with Steve and Nicole after this webinar and try and follow up with folks or point you to some resources, like I said. Please take advantage of some of these opportunities to express your interest and or learn more. Next week, you can join us at the CBE Exchange. Please say hi to me if you see me there in the virtual world. And yeah, there's also a request to share out the chat. Great request here. Yeah, lots of good questions and things coming through here. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you to wrap us up.
Sure, I think that's pretty much it. And thank you everybody for the comments. And Mara, we're so happy to partner with JFF in doing something like this. There's a lot of advantages to working with an outside organization that can see things clearly. Sometimes when we do them ourselves, we get tripped up on who's running this or who's got this school or that school. So it's nice to have your impartial outside perspective. And thank you very much for today's presentation. And so everybody, it should be up at about, before next Friday, usually about midweek. And so we'll have the edited version as well as the slides and the transcript. So you can refer to these materials. And you said there's a call coming up right next or today, right, Mara? Another one if anybody wants to jump on that. Well,
the webinars. Oh, the interest forms today, yeah, and the webinar is next week, Tuesday through Thursday, I believe. So lots of really good sessions happening there if people want to learn more. Okay. Great network of folks too, all those institutions from across the country doing stuff.
Well, thank you very much. Once again, everybody, thank you for joining us. I'll see you again next week, and thank you, Mara. Bye-bye.
Thank you, bye.